We have a number of master gardeners that are joining us today as well. And I just want to say thank you to both Ann Mason and Liz Train, who are helping us today with some of the facilitation. So we are recording this event this evening. So if you could just keep your mics muted as we are getting started. When you join us, your mic should be muted. But what's great is that this is such a wonderful platform for us to share about gardening. And our Master Gardener groups have some virtual programs as well that you could join each week, and some of the programs that they have going on, and we can advertise them in the chat box as well, are some vegetable gardening programs on Mondays at lunchtime. It's all veggies, all lunchtime. And so you could join and learn about vegetables every lunchtime on Mondays starting in March, and some other programs with virtual plant clinics that you can ask questions. But we found that a lot of our questions were about vegetables. So we wanted to dedicate at least one time where people could join us, and those are recorded as well. And then every other time we have some vegetable programs on Tuesday evening, which is at 7 o'clock. So, and we also have a virtual help desk where you could send emails and leave a phone message if you need some questions answered absolutely right away, maybe within 24 to 48 hours. But there's lots of ways for us to help you get the answers you need. And Corey, did Stacy join us yet?
I did.
We've got, oh, excellent.
Thank you. I will toss it over to Corey.
And we have someone who has their hand up. Sarah Shannon, you have your hand up. I just wanted to.
Sorry, sure. I'll take it down. Sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to be sure you didn't have a question or an issue before we got started. Okay.
I probably just accidentally hit it.
Okay, great. Thanks. I just wanted to check.
Okay, well, good evening. I'm looking at my clock and it's 7:01, so we'd like to get started. We are so thrilled that you decided to come out tonight and learn more about community gardening. If you're brand new to gardening, I want to make sure that I mention that on March 16th and March 17th, we're going to have a How to Start a Vegetable Garden class that's also co-hosted by Virginia Cooperative Extension and the Fairfax Food Council. If you've never heard of the Fairfax Food Council, we are a group of nonprofit organizations and county leaders who work together to help make our food system in Fairfax County have more affordable and accessible and more nutritious food, meeting the need for fresh local food in our community. And so I help co-lead the Urban Agriculture Work Group along with Stacey Evers, who's here tonight. Stacey, do you want to say a quick hello and maybe introduce yourself real briefly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name's Stacey Evers, and as Corey said, I co-chair the Urban Ag Work Group with him. And I just would want to say that if any of you end up with doing so well with these new vegetable gardens that you have extra produce, consider joining Grow a Row FC. We're a network of backyard and community and school gardens that donate to food banks and food pantries. And I'll put contact information in the chat, but just thanks and good luck with everything.
The Fairfax Food Council also maintains a list of food banks that accept donations. And so we've had some volunteers just recently going back through that list and making sure everything is current. So that's something we try to do on a regular basis, as well as just support any garden startups that we can as a small group. So, feel free to reach out to myself. I'll put my email on the chat if you're trying to get a community garden started. And then also make sure to come to our workshop March 16th if you're new to gardening. Tonight's speaker, I'm really excited to introduce. He's a friend of mine, Juan Pablo, who works for Arcadia Center for Sustainable Agriculture. And he is going to really focus on the practical community organizing and the practical logistics of getting a community garden started. And so if you're looking for more information on like starting seeds and the nitty gritty of caring for plants, we're happy to answer some of those questions tonight too, if we can be of help, but we're gonna have a whole nother workshop on March 16th in English, and then March 17th in Spanish that Juan Pablo will be leading. So again, we are just so thrilled to have you here with us tonight, and feel free if something is unclear. Juan Pablo said he's happy to receive questions in the chat box as we're going through tonight, and then once he's done with the presentation, we'll open it up for questions and answers, and there will be we've got a great team here tonight, including Adria Bordas, who talked with us recently, who helps lead the Master Gardener program. We've got a number of Master Gardeners here, so thank you so much, Master Gardeners, for coming out and volunteering your time to make this event possible. So without further ado, this is Juan Pablo, who has a lot of experience starting different community gardens here in Fairfax County. Unless, am I missing anything, Adria? Was there any other announcements you wanted to make before we hand off to Juan Pablo?
No, I think that we're ready to go. And Juan Pablo, I accidentally muted you, so you just need to unmute yourself when you're ready to go. And just thanks everybody for a great team effort. And put your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to help you tonight. Thank you.
Yep, thanks so much for coming.
Okay, well, let's get started. First of all, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for everyone who took the time out of our Tuesday night to sign up for our workshop. First, I'd like to introduce my organization. I work for Arcadia, the Center for Sustainable Food and Agriculture. We are a nonprofit dedicated to creating a more equitable and sustainable food system in our region. And we achieve this through a network of programs. First is our Sustainable Agricultural Farm, which grows high quality fresh food through regenerative methods. We have our Veteran Farmer Program, which increases the number of farmers by training military veterans for new careers in agriculture. We have our Mobile Market Program, which addresses the barriers to access fresh food, affordable food in neighbors that are often overlooked by traditional retailers. And finally, my program, which is Farm Education, where we're building demand for quality food through our on-farm and in-school education programs. For those who may not be familiar with Arcadia, here's a little map of where we're located. We're on Richmond Highway, right at that intersection of George Washington Memorial Parkway and Richmond Highway. And we have two locations. One is our Dogue Farm, which is our production farm. And on the other side of the highway, we have our educational garden site. So we really hope that after this, we'll be in contact and more people will want to come out and see us. I want to talk to you first a little bit about my vision and my program, something that I'm hoping to accomplish over the next year and hopefully after that. And it's this idea of creating a garden hub along Route 1. My work is specifically almost geographically limited to this area, which includes like Mount Vernon, Richmond Highway region. And what we want to do is we want to connect with schools, community centers, neighbors that garden, farmers markets, and the local government to create more opportunities for people to grow food, for communities to grow food, and for schools to grow food. And the way we're hoping to do this is first by having production gardens. We understand that gardens are supposed to be educational in schools and a fun place to be, but we also want to focus a lot on production. We want to really take advantage of the space and area that a lot of these places have to focus on production and increase production. And one of the ways we want to do that is by our garden education program. So we want to work in schools, we want to work in community centers, we want to work with people of all ages and basically train them and expose them to gardening, because we really think that it could provide so many other benefits for the community, including nutrition education. In our experience working with schools, it is clear that that we're headed, I think, for some really difficult times in terms of nutrition with students. The food that's available to them isn't the best quality. It's high in sugar, high in calories, and we really want to bring students out to the garden and bring them into the cafeteria and expose them to fresh, locally grown food. And we hope to do this also by building capacity within the community. So we want to train the future gardeners and, hopefully my replacement and other people within the community that really want to take the lead with some of these programs and expand them beyond some of these locations. And for that, we also think there's an immense source of people who are open and willing and want to volunteer. And so Arcadia wants to be able to harness that energy and direct it to some of these locations where we can expand these gardens. And I think, I often walk in my community and just see so many backyard gardens. And so I know that there's these great potential for people to share what they know. And so we really hope to be part of that. And finally, we want to do it through the enjoyment of food. So we want to create open garden days. We want to have cookouts. We want to have barbecues at some of these locations because we want people to think about not just gardening, but the whole community that surrounds it and that can really support this as a long-term thing. And so my long-term vision would be that, this area of the county and this area of Virginia is known for its community gardens, its school gardens, and for just being a place where people can access locally grown food pretty directly. And so if out of the people here tonight, if any of you live in this area or know of people that live in this area that would want to be interested, in being part of this, definitely reach out to us. This is our contact information. That's our website for Arcadia. That's my email. Another kind of interesting thing that's happening with us this year, due to the fact that, school planning for this year has just been a little hard to pinpoint. We've opened our site now for small groups to come and visit throughout the year. And so if you are part of a learning pod, if you have just a group of interested folks that like gardening, that want to learn more about sustainable agriculture, you can reach out to our field trips at arcadiafood.org email. And hopefully we can have you guys visit sometime in the garden. Moving on. So today's presentation is mostly focused, like Corey said, not so much on gardening techniques, but on how to kind of organize yourself in the community to establish gardens in your space. And one of the words that kind of jumped up to me as I was thinking about this was food sovereignty. This idea that we have the right to define what our food and our agricultural system looks like. And I think the best way to do that, to have that direct impact and agency over it, is to be able to grow food in our backyards. And obviously that means our homes, but not everyone has a backyard. And so our schools should be a place where we can grow food, and our community centers should be a place where we can grow food. Here are some pictures of some of the places what I've been working with over the last couple years. On the left, this is Whitman Middle School, their first year. And I'm glad that the teacher there was very enthusiastic and eager. She wanted to set up 26 of these squared raised beds. And I was like, that is way too many for our first time garden. We shouldn't do that. But she convinced me. We set them all up, and we actually had a fantastic first year. Unfortunately, with COVID, we couldn't go back this past year, but they have a beautiful garden. We're hoping to set up a greenhouse in their garden as well. And we were creating all sorts of other programs around this school to support the garden. So it's not just a garden space, but that we can have a cooking class. We can have we currently have a garden entrepreneur class and an after school garden class. The other two schools on the pictures on the right are from Stratford Landing and Holland Meadows, which are two of the schools that have really done an amazing job with their school gardens. They have a very supportive administrative staff, a very supportive PTA, and they have really robust, well-integrated garden programs where we're actually growing a ton of food. And so I hope that as this garden hub vision expands, that we can have more of these types of gardens at every school in our region. So different types of gardens, right? As we're thinking about this, obviously school gardens are the first one to pop up. The main idea about a school garden is that it can be used as an educational tool, and I can really think of any subject you want in class. You could definitely use the garden as a space to teach it. Math, any of the sciences, history especially, I think. Even language and English are places where the garden can really be a place where you can teach them. And so schools have, I think, not only a lot of resources, because first they usually have enclosed grass areas inside the school, which means they're protected from deer, which, as most of you will know, are rampant in this area and will destroy your garden. So they have that going for them, and they tend to have a lot of land. And so I think school gardens have a lot of potential for gardens. Then we have like traditional community gardens, kind of like ran by the county. Those, I believe, and maybe one of you will correct me, I believe there's a 3-year waiting period currently to get on the list. So there's really high demand. So it would be amazing to see more of those pop up in our community. Those tend to be, you sign up, you get a plot, and you work your own plot. Perhaps there's not as much community building around the garden because everyone's kind of in charge of their own space. Then you have communal community gardens, and these are gardens in community centers, in buildings, in apartment complexes. These tend to kind of adapt to the culture of the place. It's a lot more collaboration. It's something that's done as a community. I had the opportunity to work in Seattle with a community garden run for refugees from Bhutan. And it was just beautiful to see how they brought their culture and their way of doing things to design their garden. So their fencing, the way they build their raised beds, like everything about their garden just represented their culture. And so I feel like these community gardens over time kind of like are shaped by the culture of the community. Then we have faith-based gardens. And I think churches are also a great place for gardens. If a church owns their land, then they have access to the land. More than anything, they have their parishioners. So people that come to the church every week who are committed to improving their church community. So you have this like wealth of volunteers there. And a lot of churches also have other resources like transportation, like kitchens, where you can really, whatever you're growing, you can harvest it, bring it into the kitchen, cook it, and serve it to your church. And so I really feel like there's a lot of potential for church. And I'll put it out there, if there's any churches along Richmond Highway interested in gardening, I'm really interested in starting a garden at a church in our area. So if there's anyone out there. And then you have other alternative gardens used for therapy, for special needs, for demonstration. Today, I'm mostly going to focus on kind of communal community gardens and school gardens, but a lot of the information I'm sharing could be used for starting any type of garden. And really, what they all have in common is that they're a gathering space. They connect us to nature, and hopefully they have an impact on our food system. Moving on. All right. As I was planning this presentation, I'm not much of a linear thinker. I don't think in order when I do things. I like to bounce around and maybe, do the third step and then go back and do the first one. But I tried to organize this presentation more in a linear form. And these are kind of the steps I came up with, right? First, we have this forming the idea of like, you are an individual and you know your community, or you're a parent at a school or a teacher at a school and you think you want to set up a garden, what does that look like? And you kind of start forming the idea. Obviously, you want to have community buy-in. You want to reach out to the community and get them involved and participating heavily in the process. And you want to select the right space. This is an important part, and this is where it kind of starts to get interesting. You want to find that space in your location that really will make your garden thrive. And then you have your garden vision, which is the part where you get to design what this garden is going to look like. What will it include? Is it going to be raised beds? Are you going to grow it in the ground? Are you going to have a compost? Are you going to have a wash station, picnic tables? Kind of coming up with that idea of what it'll look like. And then finally, your plan and execution of your vision for this garden. So these are just kind of the steps I'm going to follow for this presentation. Like I said, in my experience, I haven't necessarily done it in this order, and you don't necessarily have to do it in this order, but I think it's a good way even for your thought process to follow it along. Forming an idea, and I think this one's important. You want to define the why. There's two ways to kind of think about it. There's the bottom up, right, where the local community wants a garden and comes up to you and says, hey, we want to your organization or to you as an individual, and we want you to start a garden. But there's also the bottom down, which is you see a place and you're like, this place could use a garden. The picture there is Gum Springs Community Center. And that was kind of my vision a little. I think they, in their minds, wanted a garden, but I was, in part, had already thought that I wanted to make sure that we set up a garden in this place, and we're actually in the process of it. But really having that conversation with yourself of like, why do I want to put up a garden this? And I'm speaking from the point of view as an individual, because I think whenever you start a garden, you obviously want to create you want to find your garden partners, and you want to find a committee so that you can delegate responsibilities, and that the whole process of starting the garden is shared. But in reality, and what I've seen in my experience, is that there's always one person that kind of has to lead the way and has to pull everyone and make sure and send out the emails and kind of push people to show up to meetings. And so I think that's an important part of it, and defining that why to yourself is important. I found this quote many years ago, and I unfortunately don't know who wrote it, but it really spoke to me at the time. And as I've moved, I'm originally from Guatemala, but as I moved to the US and moved a couple of times within the US, I always thought of this as I've worked in different gardens. And you can all read it, but I'll read it. It says, "We are all indigenous to this planet. This mosaic of wild gardens we are being called by nature and history to re-inhabit in good spirits. Part of that responsibility is to choose a place. To work in a place is to work with others. People who work together in a place become a community, and a community in time grows a culture. To work on behalf of the wild is to restore the culture." And for someone who, at least in my case, I left my community and left my culture, I see that we can rebuild one in the garden. That's just how kind of my philosophy and kind of what drives me. So that's just sharing a little bit of my own personal idea, but I'm saying really have that conversation with yourself, and really, because sometimes it takes a lot of time, a lot of work to get these gardens set up, and so you really want to have that idea clear. And then you want to find garden partners. You want to initially keep your group small, maybe 1 or 2 people, though you want to share your garden plans with anyone who will listen, right? Anyone who might be interested, you want to tell them that you have this idea of starting a school or community garden. But you might want to keep the group small, and you want to find someone that maybe complements your skills. So if you're a pretty good gardener, maybe find someone who's good at carpentry, or maybe find someone who's good at grant writing, because you're going to want to write some grants to get some money to put in your garden or expand your garden. And one I think that's maybe not considered as important, but it's time. I think gardens, more than money, they need time. And so if you don't find someone necessarily with certain skills, find someone that has the time, that will be able to dedicate time to the garden. And so I think that's an important one. Community buy-in. This I've kind of broken it up into two: schools and community centers. And so when we're talking about schools, really the most important person who's going to authorize everything, give you the okay, support you when no one else, is the principal. And in my experience, is if the principal's on board, everything else will fall in line. And obviously, with everything going on in schools currently, and with all the work that principals have to do, the garden might never be a priority, but you definitely want to stay on their good side, and you definitely want to win them over, because they will okay or nay a lot of the things you might be thinking about doing. Second is the PTA. In a lot of the schools where I've worked in, the PTA really ends up funding these programs. They will put it into their budget to expand gardens or to hire garden educators. And so doing that community buy-in within the PTA is really important. This one sometimes is, when we talk about equity in schools, that one's sometimes a little tricky, because not all schools have the same level of organization within their PTAs. But it's really important to reach out to that parent-teacher association and try to work with them. Obviously, teachers are really important. You want to have a garden, but you want the teachers to be willing to send their students out to the garden to work and get to know and understand the garden. And so you really want to pick a few of those teachers who might also be your volunteers, who might be willing to come out on a Saturday or stay late to help out with something. And so, as you're doing your community buy-in, identify which ones of your teachers are going to be the ones you might work with closely. The other one is custodians. This one has been really interesting for me during the pandemic, because there's a few schools we've been able to access, and there's no one really at the schools except the custodians, and which I appreciate now, because we've been able to kind of strike a relationship. A lot of them tend to have immigrated from different countries, and so they have a different set of knowledge about gardening and food that I've found really useful and really interesting. And when they've been there and they know it and they understand the garden, then they're willing to spend some of their time helping you in the garden. A lot of these places, especially during the summer, get overgrown with weeds and tomato plants, and maybe there's no one at the school. And so you want that custodial staff to really be supportive of the garden. And a great way to do them is share the bounty of the garden with them. A lot of these folks, are also financially struggling. And so I think being able to take some of the bounty from the garden will really get them interested in what's going on out there. Obviously, front office people, I feel like during the pandemic, when no one's allowed into the schools, thankfully I've struck a good relationship with people at the front office, and I'm allowed into the schools, but they can also help with any paperwork, help organizing volunteers, organizing parents. It's a group that's kind of taken for granted, but you really want to work with them and take. And then lastly is cafeteria staff. FCPS with Food and Nutrition Services is developing a strategic plan for garden to cafeteria programming. And so I think within the next few years, this idea of bringing food that's being grown at the school into the cafeteria process so that students can enjoy it will really pick up. And so you want to get them involved as well, not just because they're taking orders, but because they're committed to this program, they understand it. And so, making sure you invite them out to the garden, hear their opinions, learn. A lot of times, like I said, it's recent immigrant population that know a lot about agriculture, and you could really benefit from what they know. The pictures there at the bottom, this is Stratford Landing Elementary School. They have a couple of pretty nice hydroponic systems. and they have a lot of raised beds. And so in 2000, this is, I think, fall um, or winter of 2019, we were harvesting lettuce every week, and kids got to harvest it. They got to weigh it, wash it, drop it off at the cafeteria. We would make these cool little videos. They would go on the morning news, and so the whole school knew that the salad in the salad bar the next day had lettuce from their garden, and it really, you know, kids really, were interested in eating it far more than on a regular day, just because they knew that they had been involved in the process of growing it and harvesting it. So really cool working at that place, and the kids really, really enjoy it. And then we have community centers. Same thing, right? The manager is the person who's going to absolutely approve everything. And so you want to get their buy-in. You want to understand. At Gum Springs, the one we were working with, we definitely had the approval of the person running, Crystal, who runs that place. But during the pandemic, she got into gardening, like a lot of people did. And so when we met in the summer, I could just tell her enthusiasm to have a community garden at that site had just exploded, because she now had experienced what gardening can do. And so definitely work with the managers. In a lot of community centers, the senior community have a lot of say and a lot of power within the community. You definitely want to get them on board. So you want to reach out to them, invite them out, talk to them about your plans, and hear what they also have to say, what they would like to see in the garden. So that when you're designing your garden plan, you're considering not just, the young students who might benefit, but also the senior community who has a lot of interest and probably a lot of knowledge and experience in gardening. Youth directors, community members, your neighbors, a local nursery, all these people you want to reach out to. And I included security guard on this one, because I had something interesting happen to me at Gum Springs, where we had talked about what kind of pests we were going to face while designing, and no one thought to mention deer. They said, oh, there's a creek down there, but it's far away. And when we were finally putting in, the security guard comes up to me. He's like, hey, man, I stare at this cameras all the time. He's like, you guys are going to have to do something about the deer for sure. And so it just made me realize that as you're telling people about your garden, you don't want to exclude anyone. You want to involve everyone in the process, because everyone has some sort of insight that will benefit your process. So when, at least for this area, when we're talking with Gum Springs, and I'm still thinking about what that community buy-in looks like, but thinking maybe outside of the school, definitely the first place you want to go is Get to Green. This is an FCPS group. They do all the environmental stewarding programs for schools, and they have all the procedures, all the curriculums, like all the information you could possibly need to start a school garden in Fairfax County. You definitely want to go to Get to Green. They don't provide you with people to actually do the work, but they have all the information and all the procedures on how to get it started. Second is food and nutrition services. Like I mentioned, FCPS is developing this program so we can get stuff that's grown in the garden into the cafeteria. So they're someone that you want to partner up. They've developed procedures and programs and recommendations as to what things you want to grow in a school garden. So they're definitely a part of the school community that you want to reach out to. Another part of your process is visiting other schools. I've only listed the ones that are in my region, but I know that there are other schools in the county and probably in neighboring counties that have really nice garden programs. So just going out and visiting and telling them what you want to do will really help you with that garden vision and give you ideas on how to roll out your plan. They'll know where to get funding. They'll know, also you can share seeds and all this kind of stuff. So definitely reach out to them. The Urban Agricultural Work Group that a lot of us are members of is another group you want to be in contact with. We've helped set up some gardens. We've coming up with different grants and other programs to expand urban agriculture in our community, and that is our mission as a work group. So we definitely want to encourage and support school gardens. One that I got to be at their last training, I don't think they had one last year, but is Farm-Based Education Network, and I think this is a US based organization, but they have training and resources. Once a year they host a summit. 2 years ago they had it in Maryland, and it was fantastic. It was just garden educators from all over the country coming to geek out on gardens. It was pretty great, and the food was amazing as well. So definitely, if you're a garden educator or interested in school gardens, look them up. The Washington Youth Garden, this one's in Washington D.C., but they do teacher training, and so they're focused on finding ways that teachers can integrate the garden into their curriculum. And I was part of their summer training this past summer. It was fantastic. I can only imagine once things go back to normal, DC has some really beautiful sites to visit and to learn from. And so definitely this is a local organization you want to reach out to. And then last, of course, Arcadia Farms. We're in Fairfax County. We're focused mostly on Route 1, but we can definitely be a resource for other schools in our county who want to do farm education. And then community gardens. Obviously, Virginia Cooperative Extension, they'll help you with soil tests. They can connect you to master gardeners that are spread throughout the entire county. This is people who have been gardening for decades sometimes, and they can be a real wealth of information. And so you want to reach out to them. Urban agricultural as well. One I got to visit in DC is City Blossoms. They do community and school gardens, and they have a really cool, interesting concept on how do they design their school gardens. Really, if you get a chance to go to DC and visit them, they have just amazing programming. They have this youth entrepreneur program called Mighty Greens. You should check them out. Just like a really, really nice organization. DC Urban Greens is an urban farm in DC. They do training tours, just another place to really visit. And James Lee Community Center set up a garden, I believe maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it's in their plans to expand it a little. It's a really beautiful design right in their community. And they set it up in a place where, as you're entering the community center, you see it, it's visible, it's open for everyone. And so that's the place. And hopefully by this spring, we will have put in our raised beds at Gum Springs Community Center. And so that'll also be a place you can visit as you're trying to inform yourself. So that's part of the community buy-in. There's obviously the immediate community buy-in within the school or the community center, and then kind of reaching outside a little bit of that to try to learn more about how this works. Site selection. This would be our next step. Every garden is different. I think when every site, every space, every type of soil is slightly different. And so when you're selecting a site, you really want to go through a bit of a checklist to understand some of these things about your site. And one of the first ones is sun exposure. You want to be able to have 6 to 8 minimum direct hours of sunlight. Thankfully, Virginia is a pretty sunny place, except for the last couple of weeks. But here we have the place we selected at Gum Springs, and it was amazing. We came out, we saw it. They have sunlight all the time. We also get, probably with all that brick wall on the end there, collect some of that heat during the day, and then at night maybe release it and then kind of expand a bit of our growing season. So sun exposure is definitely probably a priority when selecting a site. You don't want to have anything under 6 hours or your plants won't grow. And so definitely when you're picking your site, look for a place that gets full sun coverage. Over time, it's easy to add shade. Virginia is pretty hot during the summer, and so you'll want some shade spots, but you can definitely add that to it. So if you want to start off with a space that gets full sun, I would recommend that, and then over time you can add space. The other one is access and visibility. I think this one's really important because you want to make sure that the garden isn't tucked away in some, back space that no one ever sees and no one ever visits. You want to make it a place that's visible and easily accessible so that maintenance is easy, but that the upkeep is also feels like a bit of a responsibility. If people can easily see your garden, you don't want a garden that's overgrown and looking messy, or that has tools lying around, right? You'll feel that almost responsibility to keep it and maintain it. And so making it visible is important. This picture here is from Stony Brook, which is on Jane Elite, right off Richmond Highway. We did an after-school garden program with some of these kids. They absolutely loved the garden, and while working there, it was great. You could see it from the apartment buildings. You could see it from the parking lot. If you dropped off your trash, you could see the garden. If you were walking to the basketball field, you could see the garden. It wasn't hiding anywhere. Sorry, it was perfectly visible, and that made it accessible, and that kind of like forced us to maintain it and keep it nice and neat. One of the interesting things about this place is that it did get a lot of shade in the afternoons, which in the end we were thankful for, because in the summer it can get pretty hot, and so it was a nice place to get some shade. The other one is a dedicated space, and this I'll use mostly this picture to show this idea. This is from City Blossoms in DC, and I really liked what they did here, because they understood they wanted to grow food in their community space, but they wanted to make the space inviting to other people. So they thought about everyone else in their community who's a non-gardener, right? And so they put reading nooks in their garden space. They put picnic tables. They put those stumps on the bottom left corner there that just made it a very inviting place so that you could come and hang out and do homework or just hang out with your friends. And I really like the concept because you're right, not everyone's a gardener, but I think everyone has the potential to be a gardener, but you want to entice them somehow. And so they created this place where they dedicated a place for the garden beds, but they also made room for other things in the garden. And so all of the gardens they've designed have this kind of idea in them, where they haven't just taken up the entire space with raised beds. They've made other designs and other spaces within the garden to invite those people who aren't necessarily interested in gardening, but do like spending time outside and enjoying nature. The other one is grade. This one I think is pretty easy. We want to ideally pick a flat spot. This will avoid erosion. This will help you keep, not having large puddles of water in your space. One of the techniques I've always used to kind of like understand the grade of the place is walk out in the middle of a rain. Get your umbrella, get your rain boots, and just walk your space while it's raining. And then you really get a sense of how the water behaves in your space, where there's good drainage, where there's not good drainage. And obviously, because we're doing a lot of these gardens are in raised beds, you can always fix any level issues you might have within a space. But ideally, you want to start off with as flat a location as you can. Access to water. This one's really important too. You want to make watering easy. Ideally, you want to have, a timer and an irrigation system, and everything waters itself perfectly. But maybe when you start, you're going to do a lot of like hand watering. And so you want to make sure that you don't have to drag a hose for 100 or 200 meters to water the garden. Adria and I, when we were looking at the site at Gum Springs, um, the closest spigot to the original location was maybe like 200 feet away. And everyone at the site was like, oh, we can definitely bring the hose that far. And Adria and I, who've been gardening, were like, no, you're not going to do that. Like, with everything that you have to do in a day, with all the work it requires, you're not going to, twice a day pull a hose 200 meters water and then roll it back up, right? And so you want to make sure that you have easy access to water. That doesn't require a lot of work. Especially in the summer, you're going to have to water a lot. You want to have that easy access to water. I would say maybe in your first year, don't invest in any like big infrastructure for watering systems. Like try to do everything by hand and water by hand. And if you're happy with the design of your garden, then over time you can think about, putting in some pipes and doing some heavy irrigation system and spending the money and the time and putting timers and that kind of thing. But I think your first year, you also want to, I don't know, at least for me, and I think for most of the gardeners here, that, a nice afternoon sunset, watering your garden, I think is one of the like most enjoyable times. And so really think about that, and when you're picking your site. The other one is your initial soil quality. Obviously, you want to get your soil tested, and you want to make sure you're not deficient in minerals, and your pH is pretty balanced. But if you're doing raised beds, a lot of the time you're going to be producing your own soil. So your goal is to improve the quality of your soil year after year by adding organic matter and adding compost. So even, anyone who starts a garden in this area knows this is hard clay, not great gardening soil. But over time, if you have a raised bed, you're building new soil and you're bringing in topsoil, maybe from somewhere else, and compost and organic matter. So I kind of left it last because it's important, that you don't have any bad things in your soil, but ideally over time you will improve the quality of your soil, especially if you're doing raised bed gardening. Other things to consider when you're thinking about your site selection: deer, squirrels, all their little friends. At home, I struggled this past year. I think the first year I was here, squirrels didn't know I had a garden. This year they found out, and it's just been an uphill battle trying to protect my plants from them. So definitely, when you're designing and thinking about your garden, know that they are always there, always around. And once they find out you have, delicious organic food growing in your garden, they're going to come after you. And so consider fencing, consider other measures that I'm sure we'll have some workshop later on in the season on how to deal with some of these things. One of the things that we also have to consider is vandalism. It happens in some places. We know of some gardens we've worked with where we just thought we could have a tool shed out in the open, and it turns out, it got vandalized. So definitely keep that in mind when you're doing. Like I said, make room for non-gardeners. So if you have, as you're designing the space, consider, how can I entice other people that aren't interested in gardening to come out and see this place? Sometimes it could be as easy as a bench, right? If you have a nice bench in a garden, that might attract people to come out and sit. The other one is stand outside under the rain. Like, learn how the water moves and behaves in your garden by standing outside while it's raining. You can always improve the quality of your soil. The other one you want to consider is some form of shelter from the wind. For example, in this school, and that's the case for a lot of the schools, they usually have walls all around, so wind's not an issue. But if you're doing a community center or something, just something to think about. over time. So maybe having some trees in the area that maybe do produce some shade might be beneficial because it'll protect your plants from those heavy winds. Today, I think, was an example. We had some pretty strong winds this afternoon. The other is audit what natural resources are near you. As you're designing the garden, you want to understand what other things are around you. So maybe you want to take a walk in your neighborhood and you realize that some of your neighbors have some really nice perennial plants. Maybe you can take cuttings from those plants. Maybe they have roots they could share with you, or but it's understanding what other natural resources are near you that can help you in your design process. One of the things we did for some of the schools here was we were trying to fill up some of the beds, and we wanted to do a thick layer of dry leaves at the bottom of these raised beds. In the fall, like every house, everywhere has a huge collection of dry leaves. And so, we understood that about our surrounding, and we were able to just drive up and down streets collecting people's leaves. And then the other one is you'll always want some shade. Gardening in the middle of the summer in Virginia is intense. You'll want to have some space in your design that can provide some sort of shade. So if you need to take a break, or anyone needs to take a break, you have some shade. Obviously, you could always go inside, but if you want to stay outside, it's nice to consider having some shade. This picture here is from Riverside Elementary School. They have, I really like what they did. They designed their garden in this area that's right when you walk into the school. So anyone that walks into their school, one of the first things that they see is this garden. And they didn't go crazy with a lot of beds. They put in, a nice amount of beds, but they also knew that they wanted to have an outdoor classroom, and so they have a whiteboard and they have tables and benches out there for them. And so this is by comparison, a small school garden, but I think they did a nice job with the design. Garden vision. All right. This is when you're thinking about your garden and what you want this garden to look like. These are a few things you want to consider. Design for your audience. Like, who is the audience in this garden? Who is going to be working in this garden? If this is a community center, you might have people with different ages working in the garden. So if you have youth, you might do some low raised beds. But if you have someone in senior community, or your community has people in wheelchairs or something, maybe design some high raised beds so that they can have easy access to your garden. So definitely think about who your audience is. In schools especially, at times you'll have 20, 30 kids outside in the garden. You want to make sure that there's enough space in between the beds for you to have a group of 30 students standing around. In this picture that I have here, I'm thinking like, all right, there's grass in between the raised beds. Like, who's going to cut that grass? When you're thinking about maintenance and how to maintain the space, you want to make sure that you can run a lawnmower through that space, right? Because you want to facilitate that work for yourself. And so, spacing between the beds is important. Not to maximize the growing space, you're going to reduce walking space for your garden. The other one is, I think if this is the first time you're starting a garden, you have some community buy-in, but you don't want to maybe start with the biggest garden space ever. You can always start small and over time build and adapt, right? Your garden will constantly be expanding, will constantly be changing. I think that's one of the fun parts about gardening, that you can do all these things over time. The other one is, I think you want to make it visually attractive. I know, talking with other garden people, sometimes they're like, no, it's a garden. It's supposed to look wild and unruly. And though I agree with that idea, I also think that because you're doing it in a space that belongs to the community, you want to make sure that it has some sort of attractive features to it. And the best way is just plant flowers in, maybe in a dividing wall between the path and the garden. Or if you're, designing your raised beds, just make sure that they are aesthetically pleasing, because I think one of the things I've experienced working in a lot of the schools is that, someone built a garden, then someone came one year and saw that they were full of weeds, overgrown, and they were like, let's get rid of this. And they just bulldozed an entire garden, because visually they were just kind of like offended by what it looked like. And so definitely keep that in mind. I think making room for art is really cool too. If there's a space, a wall, if you want to paint some of the beds, or something, just making some room for art. And this goes with the idea of inviting non-gardeners into your space. The other was, when you're designing it, always think about the maintenance. In the spring, everything grows beautifully and it's easy and it's well kept and it's maintained. Once you hit that summertime and your weeds and your grass and your tomatoes and everything just like explodes, like it'll be a lot more work maybe than you originally thought. And so definitely, as you're designing it, think about the maintenance. And part of that is like the spacing between the beds, thinking about where you're going to put your tool shed so that you don't have to like walk long distances to get things. Just like these little details sometimes that will help you in terms of like reducing the amount of maintenance you'll have to do. And then think about like perennial annual plants. You'll have your raised beds, which will be your annuals, where you'll grow your lettuces and your tomatoes and things, but you might want to have some areas that are perennial, and that will reduce the amount of work sometimes in the season, because you'll have things that are just growing that you don't really have to worry about. All right, and then moving on. All right, raised beds. So you're designing your vision, you have an idea, and then you have to pick what type of raised bed you want to do. And so I've picked some here that I've worked with, that I've used. There's the one on the left is just cinder blocks. I got to do one also in Seattle that was like that, and it was leftover stuff from a construction site. And so that's what we had, that's what we did. And it actually worked really well. They're sturdy, they'll be there forever. To me personally, they're not as like attractive looking, and so they wouldn't be my preference necessarily, but I think they're not that expensive, and they last a while, and you can obviously build them as high as you want them. Then we have these like plastic raised beds that you see. I think Home Depot or Lowe's sells those, and I would say those are my least favorite. When we were putting these together at Whitman, as we're like setting them up, they're breaking up. And so they tend to be poor quality. They tend to be also very shallow. And so, if you have them, use them, but I wouldn't spend my money necessarily on those. And then you have the brick and stone. These are permanent features, right? If you build with these might be there forever. And I think they're really attractive. They look really well. Brick is, I think it releases moisture nicely, and it works well. That's a nice option. One that have gotten very popular recently are the metal raised boxes. I think those are also pretty attractive. They look well. They're sturdy. They can hold a lot of soil. I guess my only negative aspect about them is if you want to put in a trellis, if you want to connect any sort of structure to them, you can't really drill things into them. And that would be the only like negative aspect about them. I'm guessing there's some that are designed differently, but the ones I've gotten to work with, if you want to do some like kind of greenhouse hoop houses things, they're just not that easy to work with. And then there's just wood. I think that's probably my favorite. It looks natural in a garden. I think it might be the cheapest. These beds that we built here for Stratford Landing, I think the total cost was like $65 for the bed. They're 8x4 Douglas fir. I think they'll last maybe 4 to 5 years, but they're natural. It looks good. If we want to drill anything to them, if we want to, next year we realize we want to raise them, it's easy to work with wood. And so I don't know, I think I recommend wooden raised beds. In my experience, though, I think one of my favorite gardens is gardens that have mixed media. So they have some wood, some rock, some metal, and I think that kind of teaches also a bit of like everything that's that you could use, a lot of things that are already available to build a garden. And so I think if you look and you look around and you do some research, you can find a lot of reusable materials to build your raised garden. But these are some of the basic ones. Compost. In your design, you definitely want to have a compost space. I think, and these are three different ones, and I put some prices there for more or less what they could cost. The worm compost, really cool. You grow worms, but if you have a pretty productive garden, that might not be enough. You won't be able to process your organic matter fast enough. So the turning compost is probably the best one. Especially, at the end of every season, you have to pull everything out and put new stuff into your beds, but everything you're pulling out has to be composted. And so having multiple turning compost spaces is probably what you're going for. The other one is a tumbler. I feel like that one's great for backyards, low maintenance, easy to work with. You throw things in there, you kind of ignore them. They're pretty popular in school. Kids love spinning that thing around. Ideally, if you're in a school setting, you would want to have all three of them because there's things to learn in all of them. The worm compost could become your worm factory that you could, pull out worms and feed into your turning compost. But kids also love working and seeing worms. So definitely when you think about your designing a compost, when you're thinking about designing your garden, find a space for a compost in there. And obviously unmaintained compost sites can attract pests, can attract odors, can attract detractors of the garden. And so think about the maintenance as well. How are you going to maintain it? How are you going to keep it clean? Where are you going to source your brown and green material so that you have a well-balanced compost pile and it's not attracting bad odors or rodents or anything like that. And then other features you want to think about in your garden. You want to have a tool shed. Maybe not as nice as that one in the picture, but some space dedicated for keeping your tools. You don't want to leave your tools out. Otherwise, that'll be a yearly expense that you don't want to have to deal with. So having a dedicated space where you can keep all your tools is really important. Sink and a washing station are ideal. In my vision for some of the schools we're working with where we really want to increase production, we've all set up these washing stations. And the idea is that we can immediately harvest things, wash them so we kind of cool them off, and we're able to process them and then put them away. Obviously, with all the new requirements for health and things, you want to have a nice place to be able to wash your hands before and after you've been working in the garden. So obviously you can just hook up a hose and use the hose to wash it, but having a dedicated space, I think, does a good job. And then rain barrels. If you have a tool shed, if you have any other sort of infrastructure where you can collect that rain, I think that's just something we should all be doing in our homes and everywhere. But definitely, if you're thinking about designing a garden space, think about where and how you can collect some of that rainwater. Other things that are infrastructure that you can think about, you want to have maybe some shaded area, a barbecue grill. Like I said, I think gardens should be inviting for events and for other things. And so if you could have a space there to cook, some picnic tables, an outdoor kitchen. If you're in schools, you want a bulletin board, or a community center, you want a bulletin board to announce activities or leave messages for your community. Signage as well, I think, is important because you want the garden to be educational for everyone. And so if you have signage to show people what's growing, I think that's a pretty neat feature. A weather station is also really interesting in the school context of learning, how much rainfall we're getting, how much humidity, all these things. And then a whiteboard in the school is important because you want the space to be used as an educational site as well. So these are kind of like some of the basic things when you're thinking about designing your space. What are the elements you need? What's the infrastructure? What's the designing of your raised beds and other infrastructure you need in your space? And then we're getting to plan and execute. These are, first you got to get your site approved. This is the first step. With schools, you want to call Miss Utility, figure out what's buried underground, understand if there's gas, electricity, everything. You don't want to set up your garden only to find out a year from later that you have to, that you build your garden over some important lines. And so definitely reach out to them. It's a great service, works pretty easy. They'll give you the results. Then you want to get a soil test kit. They're available at most Fairfax libraries for $10. And you just send your soil sample and you get back all the results of what your current soil is like. Like I said, because you're doing it in raised beds, over time you're going to improve the quality of the soil, but it's good to know where you start, and it's good to know over time also do more soil tests to know how you've improved the quality of your soil. If your organic matter has increased, if your pH is balanced, what other nutrients you might be running low on. And then you want to go and submit a form. It's the DC 407. And then you finally do a check with utilities at schools, and they check for other FCPS utility lines. All this information for schools is on the Get to Green website. And like I said, they have a really nicely organized way of just going through all the steps to get your garden approved. And then for community centers, same thing, Miss Utility, get your soil tests. And then if for some reason you have a garden that's over 5,000 square feet, then you do need the Northern Virginia Soil and Conservation people to come out and inspect your site and make sure that you're dealing with good water drainage and you don't have erosion on your site. These are obviously the basic steps, but you always want to get whoever's in charge of these sites, they're okay. So in terms of school, you want the principal. Community centers, you want the manager or the owner of the community center to approve these sites. Next, you want to start thinking about funding. And this one, I was like, there's so much. If you start looking for funding for community gardens or school gardens, you will spend hours on the internet finding so many different sources for money. I listed some of the grants that we've worked with recently that have that we've been granted either at Arcadia or at some of the schools. But there's just like a very, very short list of organizations or nonprofits that support school gardens. Recently, one of the ones that we worked with that I think did a great job was Home Depot. They donated all the materials to rebuild the garden at Mount Vernon High School. And they sent us maybe like 15 of their employees. And so they like donated all the materials, donated, volunteer work, and helped set us up. And it was great because there was, people obviously who know how to use tools and know how to build things. And so they did a fantastic job. But any of those organizations on there provide, but like I said, it's endless. And then there's other sources. And I think this is where you can get a little more creative if you're not looking to write grants, but you have corporate funders, you have hardware stores that might be willing to donate some tools, garden centers who will maybe donate some soils. You can definitely do some crowdsourcing. Like I said, gardens don't need a lot of money. They need some of your time. And so if you can get, any sort of amount, crowdsourced through your friends and contacts, you can definitely set up a garden. You can do fundraising activities, personal donations, Facebook. This is, as a new father, one of the groups we've really benefited from is by the Buy Nothing groups. And it's amazing. It's just, there's so much stuff that people already have that are looking to give away. And so if you get on some of these groups and ask for things, I'm sure you could get so many tools, compost bins, like tons of stuff donated to you. And so definitely, the funding is never something you should worry about too much. Over time, you definitely want to have some sort of way to source, because your tools are going to get lost or break, and you want to renew some of that stuff, but over time. And this is a Ron Findley. For those who might not know, he's known as the gangster gardener who from LA, who wanted to grow fruit trees in the sidewalks, and the county fought him, and then he fought the county, and eventually won and was able to like plant fruit trees all over his neighborhood and community in LA. And he has this quote that growing your own food is like printing your own money. And I would like to think that we could do something like that in some of these communities, where if you're growing enough food, that maybe that surplus could be sold, and you know, that would be a way for some of these places to be sustainable as well. And not just food, but seedlings. I feel like seedlings is something people are always looking to buy. And if you go to any hardware store, they tend to not be that great. And so that could always be an avenue for growing. The other one is supplies. I made a short list here of some of the, I think, basic supplies you could need for a garden. And it includes 5 raised beds that are 8x4, and 5 cubic yards of composting, 5 cubic yards of topsoil, meaning that you would fill up those 5 beds, and then basic tools. So I'm thinking, I just kind of wanted to give you a glimpse of, if you're starting a garden, you want to, you know, you don't have a lot of resources, but $1,000, you can have all your tools, all your raised beds, and all your soil and compost. And this is thinking of like actually buying everything new, rather than like trying to find donations and giveaways and things like that. And then I put on the right hand side a few ways to get some of the compost that you need. Veteran Compost is a local veteran run company that produces compost from food scraps from homes and offices. The other one is Compost Crew. They also have the same business model, where they collect food from homes and offices and turn that into compost. They're fantastic. I think the average price is like $35 for a cubic yard of compost with either of these companies. So it's actually a pretty good deal, and it's all local. I would definitely recommend them. And then mulch is another thing you might need regularly when you're thinking about your garden, either to mulch your paths or to put into your compost. And so we recently worked with a tree removal company who, after cutting down and shredding a tree, just dropped off a truckload of wood chips for us. Didn't charge us a thing, and we probably got like 10 cubic yards of mulch. So there's definitely ways to, you know, especially if you're working within a community, to identify which places are willing to give you things for free. And when trying to identify how much soil you need, which is always a tricky thing, there's soil calculators online. You can just Google soil calculator, and then they'll take the measurements of your raised bed, and they'll tell you how much soil you'll need. So this is just kind of like an idea of maybe how much you would be spending on a garden as an initial investment to get a site going. There's other things here that, you know, fencing and other things that you might, depending on the site, but I think at a minimum, this is kind of like a starting budget for a garden. The next is volunteers. This is how to work. I think, you know, when you're starting your garden and as you're continuing and making your gardening program successful and sustainable, you definitely want to reach out to volunteers. And that could be, if it's a school, it could be your your volunteers within the community. It could be teachers, it could be parents, it could be neighbors, if it's the community as well. But here are some like kind of tips that in my experience you need when working with volunteers. If you have a list of activities planned out. Don't make volunteers stand around for 40 minutes while you figure out what to do in your day. Definitely have it all planned out. People are eager to come out and work hard. So you definitely want to have a list of what you want to do and have direct instructions. You get all sorts of volunteers, people that have the experience and people that don't have the experience. So be ready to explain things quickly, to give out tools, to assign tasks, and then move on to a different group of volunteers. But being prepared, I think volunteers really appreciate that when showing up to a site. The other one is regularly scheduling these work days. For us at Arcadia, we do the second Saturday of every month. And I think we've had people come for like 8 years now in a row or something, because it's the same day every month, and it's just something that's easy for people. They all know, and it just becomes like a regular way of working. The other one is keep your group size manageable. This has happened to us sometimes where it's Ivy, my work partner, and myself, and we get 35, 40 volunteers. Managing that size group just between the two of us, sometimes it's a little too much, and that you end up neglecting some people who you assign something and then you don't come back to them for an hour because you're moving around back and forth between other groups. And so make sure that you keep the size of your volunteers manageable so that you can actually get more work done. And we've learned now recently, especially with the pandemic, that our groups had to be reduced drastically, that having smaller groups sometimes gets more work done because you can give better instructions. People are more are there and just take directions and work. And so making sure you can manage your group is really important. The other one is volunteers like to do more than weed. Weeding's kind of like the boring task in gardening, but make sure you have other projects when you have your volunteers, and it's not just like weeding every time they show up. They want to be able to like do other things and learn other things, and even within a volunteer day, make sure you rotate them so that, you know, if you're weeding then for an hour, then maybe you can turn compost for an hour, and then maybe you can plant things the next 30 minutes. And so just having other activities set up is really important. The other one is small work days versus big work days. We've done this at schools where we maybe have, you know, we want to get a little bit of work done and we want some extra help. And so we'll invite maybe like 5 people to work. And that's a small group and we get a lot done. But sometimes we want to like bring in mulch from outside and like prune and cut and like, you know, just do a lot of big work. And so maybe 4 times a year, at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of summer, in the middle of summer, and in the winter, you have these big work days where you get a lot done. And over time, you want to find your core group. So you'll be able to identify that small group of maybe like 4 or 5 volunteers that are regular, that love it, that get along with everyone, that are a pleasure to be around. And once you have that core group, then whenever you have small assignments, you can reach out to them. And we definitely felt that during the pandemic at Arcadia, where we'd had identified our small group of volunteers, and it was easy to reach out to them. They were always coming. We knew they would respect all the social distancing rules and everything. Yeah, it was just really nice to be able to count on them. And it was nice for them that they knew we trusted them so that they could come out to our site. And the other one is you could be looking for your replacement. As you're working with the groups of volunteers, you always want to keep an eye out for someone who's local, who's interested, who has the time, that might be eventually taking your space, right? Or because you want to be able to delegate some of these responsibilities. So a lot of the times within your volunteer groups, you'll be able to find that person. And then I put up a few more. I've become a huge fan of Nextdoor app, obviously for good neighborhood gossip, but also if you ever want to organize anything within your community. I think schools usually tend to reach out to volunteers that are parents or teachers, but sometimes forget about their neighbors. And a lot of the times these are people that don't have kids in the school system anymore, but at one point were connected to the school and you don't really have a way to reach out to them. I think Nextdoor is an awesome way to be able to reach out to them. And you want those people that are within walking distance of your site that can regularly come and be your volunteers. So it's definitely like a technology out there that would really be beneficial. At Arcadia, we've worked with corporate groups, and these are obviously big companies who want to provide these opportunities for their workers and their staff. They're usually hardworking, very motivated. Large groups come in, do a big project. This is Capital One in Alexandria. They came out. We had them pulling beets out of the ground for an entire day and washing beets, which is actually pretty hard work if you have large extensions of land. But if you have 30 people out there doing the work, it was actually a really enjoyable opportunity to work with them. And the other one that we've recently reconnected with, they were the ones that also helped work at Mount Vernon High School, is the Mission Continues. This is a veteran group, and especially the platoon that's in this region is really focused on urban agriculture and working in schools and community centers designing gardens. We're hosting them on April 10th at Arcadia, and they're coming out, they're rebuilding a bunch of our raised beds, putting in a pergola, and they're able to raise the money for it. They have a huge list of volunteers, so it's really a unique group. And obviously, because of their military experience, they're highly organized and very efficient with their time and their resources. So those are just a few groups you can reach out when you're thinking about having volunteers and how to manage your volunteers as well. So this, I kind of created like a short timeline. Obviously, like I said, in my experience, I'm not necessarily work in this order, but I kind of wanted to give you folks kind of an idea of what a timeline could be when you start thinking about it. And so if we're thinking about, right now, February 23rd, I want to start a garden at this school, what that could look like. And I kind of separated it based on seasons. Obviously, these things could take a lot less time, or they could take a lot more time. But these are kind of a few of the steps you would want to take. And sometimes what takes a while is that community buy-in that over time you wanna build and do it. And for that example, I have kind of what we did at Gum Springs. And this started in the summer of 2019. In the summer there, we started hosting a summer market and taste tests. So we would harvest things from Arcadia Farms. We would show up on Wednesdays at the community center, and as kids were leaving all their programming, they would come through our market. We would let them taste different things we had grown in the garden. It was the summer, so obviously there was a lot of good tomatoes and squash and all this stuff growing. But that was like our first connection to the center, and it allowed the center to get to know us, to see us, to know what we were about. We got to meet the kids, we got to meet the senior community, and it was like our first approach with them. And I think it, from the very beginning, kind of like solidified our program and our intention to work with them. Later on, NCS, which is Neighborhood and Community Services that runs these sites, came out to the farm, and we gave them a farm tour. They got to see how a lot of things grow. They got to walk the space, and Ivy and I gave them a nice tour. The hope was that they were going to help us bring some of their students out to our summer camp. which they did. And that was another way that we kind of like built that relationship with this community. And then later I think it was in the fall of that year, we had the senior community come out to the farm. And so the center has a bus, and then they put all their senior communities out there. They came out, we harvested salad greens and made them a salad, and served them a salad out in a beautiful fall afternoon in the garden. And I think that was the day that we were like, all right, we've got these people. They like what we're doing. They're interested. And I could tell just the amount of like power and influence that the senior community had over the community center. And so we knew that once we had them interested, that they were going to help us with setting up the garden. But then the pandemic hit. And so 2020 was kind of a lost year, and we weren't able to do much. But one thing we understood was that these communities that we've been working with needed and wanted to have access to food. And so we set up a food distribution site at Gum Springs. We were there, I think, for 18 weeks. Overall, we did almost 3,000 pounds of fresh produce. A lot of it grown at Arcadia, but some of it sourced from local farmers. And we distributed this food, and this was another way that we said, hey, we're committed to working with you. We want to do this long term, and even if we can't do what we want to do, which is gardening program, we're here to support the community. And so after that, in the fall, we were like, all right, now we have a garden design. This is Corey's architectural design skills right there. But he and I've been working with them. We designed a garden. We brought them out to the site. We explained what we wanted to do. We got feedback from them. We told them we wanted to do an area of perennial trees, fruit trees, and they sorry, my dog's barking. And we gave them a list of potential trees. They picked out the ones they wanted, and so that was the part of that exchange that we wanted to have with them. And then we finally started our first part of the garden, and we built these hugelkultur raised mounds where we planted our trees, and those are the ones you see in that site. I don't know if you recognize it from previous pictures where there was nothing, but that was the first part of our garden design, and we're looking forward to setting up these garden beds in March. Corey's donated the wood, and we're going to do a little workshop on how to build these raised beds. I think March 20th, I believe we've set it up for. But this has been kind of the process working with Gum Springs. And so like I said, our initial timeline was, we want to start in the summer and build in the spring. We had to throw in a pandemic in the middle of that. And so it's been a 2-year process, but now we're ready. And hopefully by April, we'll have a very robust garden program at Gum Springs. I just want to finish off showing you a few other pictures of some of the gardens we worked at. This is Whitman Middle School. Beautiful. This place gets so much sun. We had an amazing first year. We grew okra, sweet potato, watermelons, melons, tomatoes, cucumbers. Like, we had 26 of these raised beds. We just grew so much food. And one of the things I understood with this middle school was that they didn't have a garden teacher. But we did have the support of the school. And so we understood that we had to create other programs within the school that support the garden. And so we did the after school garden program. We have a cooking class there that's hosted by one of the teachers who's very involved with the garden. And the idea is that we can grow things there and then use them for her cooking class. And then we have a garden entrepreneur program at the school. And this idea is that we're exposing the youth to just different folks in the community that work in agriculture and food, and just showing them all the different possibilities for careers for people who are interested in the environment and who are interested in agriculture. The other one is Riverside. I talked to you a little bit about this one. I'm excited. Miss Heron, I think she's a 3rd grade teacher there. Just amazing, and I'm hoping that we can expand their garden this year. And then the last two, we have Holland Meadows and Stratford Landing. Like I said, these are two of the most well-funded, with the most support school gardens in this area. And I wanted to share one interesting fact about the garden at Holland Meadows. They were, when they built this site, they were thinking about putting mulch around the raised beds. And I said, yeah, mulch is free. Schools get it for free. Yeah, you need to bring in volunteers to lay it out, but that's fine. They decided to go for gravel because they thought that would prevent weeds from growing. I guess they don't know weeds because weeds are impossible to control. And so now they have gravel growing, weeds growing in the gravel. And it turned out to be a pretty expensive, I think, investment on their part to put it in. It didn't quite work. And as you can see, there's weeds already growing all around. And so I would definitely, if you're thinking about how to reduce the amount of work, maybe eliminate grass, I think mulch is probably the easiest one to work with, and like I said, in most places you can get it for free. But this place has a beautiful garden. They have those huge water catchment systems there for rain, and so they're collecting rainwater, and we're using that rainwater to water the garden. And then at Stratford Landing, also beautiful site. There we were thinking about doing mulch on the right-hand side there where you see the grass. And over time we said, no, let's let the grass grow and let's just get a weed whacker and just keep it down. And it actually is less work than having to mulch constantly. And whenever we let the grass grow a little bit and we can cut it back, we can use that in our compost, and grass clippings are great to heat up your compost. And so it's actually been like we're growing our own resources on site. And so I think that's that was something that over time we kind of learned about the garden, but it's a really neat space. Fort Hunt Elementary School is another school that we were hoping to work with in 2020 and expand their garden. They have a few raised beds there. We were hoping to double that space and include them in the garden to cafeteria program as well. And I'm hoping that once things go back to normal, we'll do that. And then Stony Brook is one of the community centers I've worked with. I really like this picture. This is from the first day I came out to meet them and work with them. And it was a small group. It was just, I think their directors there and five students. And they were just so overwhelmed. They were like, how are we ever going to clear all these weeds? And I was like, we can do this. And, all, 7 of us for like 2 hours just worked on cleaning the space up. And it was just so nice to see their satisfaction of a job done and completed when we were done, and to see the results of like, wow, we just had to dedicate a bit of time to this garden and we cleaned it up. And over time, it's been nice because they've really gotten involved and they've done a good job at maintaining it. And it's a small space, but they have a lot of potential, and I think that we'll expand their garden program there. And last one, this is a Creekside Community Center. This is a place on my first day on my job with Arcadia. I went out to meet them, and Miss Yolanda there in the pink shirt said, I want a garden. This is the space we have. Pretty small space, basically enough to build 2 large raised beds. And so we set it up, and we had an amazing year there. Obviously the pandemic didn't allow us to have continuity with the program. But I went from literally trying to beg kids to try lettuce to watching them pull kale off the plants and eat raw kale in front of me. Like I could just see, after working with this group for a year, just this like transformation and how they accepted me especially, but also how they were just so willing and open to try things that they were growing and then they got to see. And thankfully we had a very bountiful first year. We collected like so many pounds of tomatoes there. We grew tons of collards. I remember one day with one of the students, we just harvested all the collards and we stood on the sidewalk of their community center and just handed them out to people. And that helped us invite people, and we showed them what we had. And it was probably the smallest garden I've built so far. But I think it had really, really great big impact on this community and its community I look forward to working with after. And that's it. That's what I have for today, and just open for questions now.
All right, thanks, Juan Pablo. We are at 8:33, so perfect. Liz, what kind of questions do you have in the chat box? I see that we were trying to keep up with them as we went along to try to help you out there, Juan Pablo, the ones that we could answer.
Yeah, I don't see, I think they were answered. There was a funding question of how do you get the funding, and that was addressed. How far south do you look? And you gave the reference for Prince William County. And then just other people were referencing resources, next door and buy nothing, community websites, etc. So I don't see any other questions.
We can open it up. If someone has a question and wants to come on, you're welcome to ask Juan Pablo or any of our other Master Gardeners here a question, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't realize I'd taken so much time.
Hi, I am at Arcola, Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm starting, last summer, we were supposed to start a garden. I have all the materials and everything ready, and it was supposed to happen in March. And then all of a sudden the school got closed. So I wanted to know if there's any information for Montgomery County area. Like, you talked about a lot of resources in your area, but I'm starting the garden, but I just needed some more information. I'm hoping to start it this summer.
I'm actually new to this area, and so I don't know what resources are available specifically in Montgomery County. One of the things I learned with this is that if you strike a good relationship with the principal, because you're working outdoors, I gained access to the schools, I think, in July. And so there was no teachers there. There was maybe some front office staff, but we were able to enter the schools. And obviously, I brought in a few volunteers and we wore masks the whole time. And because it's an open space, everyone can work separately. And so I think definitely reaching out to them and trying to figure out if you can access the school, even though some schools are technically closed. I think you might be surprised that you do get access to the schools. And then in terms of curriculum or that kind of thing, let me scroll back to mine. Farm-based education network.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
Yeah, I think they're excellent. The Washington Youth Garden as well. And I know Get to Green is specific for Fairfax County, but their information on there is, is about gardens and how to garden, how to use it in the classroom. And so I think that you could easily share that even if it's not.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Juan Pablo, we do have a question from Natalie looking for suggestions on how to get past HOA laws, I assume for a community garden, getting signatures, but any better ideas, asking for Woodbridge in Prince William County.
For HOA?
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the Montgomery County, I would also look into the Master Gardener group there. They have a strong program there, and I would look into their Home Garden Information Center for Maryland, and you can look into that and then get contacted with a group for where you're located. Take it away, Juan Pablo. HOA laws and ordinance.
Oh,
Do you want to tackle that, or is that one for Corey?
I think that might be for Corey. I had to Google HOA.
Yes. Homeowners associations can be very restrictive as far as what they're going to allow you to do. If you can't convince your neighbors to change your HOA laws, the next best thing is to work around them with edible landscaping. So for example, okra has absolutely gorgeous flowers, very nice architectural structure, and you could put okra maybe into a mixed flower bed and get some food out of your front yard. You probably won't be able to sneak tomatoes into a edible landscaping bed in your yard, but there are other decorative edibles. Lots of different herbs have really nice flowers and can mix into a planting bed. I think in April we will, I don't have the date in front of me, but in April we will have an edible landscaping workshop where we'll talk a lot about different plants that are beautiful. Blueberries is a great example of a plant that's beautiful in 4 seasons. Has really nice red stems during the winter time and a long season of red foliage in the fall. And if you're looking for a blueberry that the birds don't eat, so you don't have to cover it, there's varieties such as pink lemonade that ripen when they're pink. And so that would be a good choice for a decorative plant that also would provide some food for you that you could put in your front designed edible landscape or landscaping where your HOA probably wouldn't complain. And there's lots of different trees and that can produce fruit that would be a good choice, such as our native serviceberry or Juneberry is a really attractive tree that has like white spring flowers, red fall foliage, has a nice branching structure, a little bit like a crepe myrtle. And so anyway, come out to our class in April if you're interested in plants that can fit well without upsetting your HOA.
And we have another question from Janice. Are there any issues with insurance in community gardens? I'm assuming that means, I don't know whether that's liability or.
I guess it depends on who owns the property, okay? And who ultimately is responsible, and that is going to be an agreement with the landowner and so forth. Corey, you have a community garden on the property of your Daniels Run Peace Church, but there might be different agreements with different people depending upon what's going on.
Yeah, as far as I know, at Daniels Run Peace Church, we didn't pay any extra for liability insurance. Now, this might be a situation where we didn't ask permission, and so we may end up having to ask forgiveness later. But I mean, gardens are pretty safe. Depends, unless you're getting out like heavy rototillers or heavy equipment. But if you're doing hand tools, I mean, I think it is a good idea probably to look into it, and your insurance company will probably charge you an extra fee for a rider, but I don't know that we've ever done that. Is there anyone else here that could answer that question? Others who have had experience with getting an insurance rider for having a community garden?
Hi, this is David Sachs with Friends of Urban Agriculture in Arlington. Real quick, Juan Pablo, you killed it. What an awesome presentation tonight. The information you provided, top notch. I was doing screen grabs throughout the presentation thinking, I got to use that. I think, Corey, you're absolutely right. It depends on location. For insurance, it really depends on who owns the property. And a lot of times it's going to be underneath the umbrella of existing coverage that that property owner already has. One caveat you may want to think about, though, is that just asking someone to sign a liability waiver or a participation waiver may not stand in court. So, definitely understand what you're doing, who's doing it. It might make sense to restrict certain chores or certain tasks. You mentioned tillers or mowers, any power equipment. You definitely want to make sure you understand who's using that and restrict access to that, so people are less likely to hurt themselves. But I think we all know things happen, people get hurt, so a lot of that is also community, building support, helping people to understand safety, how to work smart. But insurance it's not always cheap either. But it's a lot more expensive not to have it and end up in court. So I think it just definitely understand the site selection, and I really appreciate the slide earlier on about site selection. But know what you're getting into, ask the right questions, and liability. It's one of those things that it differs. Every site's going to be different. And on school gardens, that brings up a whole nother set of issues. As schools roll out their plan to return students to the classroom, as volunteers are on school property, we can imagine that the school boards are going to be really sensitive around the idea of volunteers and who's on the property, not to mention the existing sensitivity around adults with children. So again, another example of how each site's going to be a little different, but nothing's impossible.
Thanks so much for chiming in, David. I appreciate your insight, and your leadership in urban ag is great. Thanks for coming out tonight. Are there other questions for Juan Pablo or for any of the many master gardeners we have here? I know it's getting pretty late, so we don't want to hold you longer, but we do want to be helpful if we can to anyone that's trying to start up a garden.
I guess I'm just wondering, with all of this interest in community and school gardens, and with Fairfax County having, this is the first I've heard of the Get to Green. We have the academies in the schools, like the Biomedical Academy, arts. Is there any move or thought to have an urban agriculture academy where we are developing kids to be stewards of the earth and to expose them to these careers, and then find places in our community, whether it's working for the county, working for nurseries, refurbishing tools? There's so many different ways to go with science and with environment. And it's, from what I've been learning, there's a lot of money and a lot of resources out there. But is there any movement to have a big umbrella to help guide all of these smaller projects in the community, and where you're, helping out, I guess, that high school or that community with even, the immigrant population and what they can bring towards different methods and tying everybody together? Maybe it helps to bridge with literacy and with more involvement, doing something in that kind of scope.
It's funny that you mention it, because Adria and I've been talking about that specifically. The closest academy that comes to it right now is like the cooking or culinary one. And Adrian, that's something that was sort of on our radar recently, is that we should be pressing for that, but it's something that's we would love to have your support and help, in fact, in figuring out how to maneuver that through FCPS. So if you have any thoughts or advice on how to make that happen, because no, I haven't heard anything. And Adria, have you heard any move for it?
No, at Arcadia, we're hoping to roll out this pilot program for this year. We were supposed to do it last year, but we moved on to this year, and we're hoping to start with 4 teenagers. They'll go through a training with us, and then it'll be a paid internship as well. And we're hoping to locate them at these community centers, and they will be the go-to garden helpers for the community centers. And it'll be our first year. We're going to test that out, see how it works. But I guess that is part of the idea of building that capacity within the community. And I think being able to not only train them, but like pay these young people for their work is something we feel very strongly about. And so we won't be able to cover much ground with only 4 people, but for our first year, we're testing it out and see how it works. But yeah, I think finding people within the community that have an interest in the environment or working outdoors and trying to harness that interest and energy into these community gardens is part of our strategy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie, for the vision that you outlined there. I think Stacy and I are both volunteer leaders of the Urban Agriculture Work Group, and so we would absolutely love to see the county put more financial resources into environmental stewardship. I mean, not with the urban forestry, which is exciting, and increasing tree canopy and increasing tree cover. And so I think that having more healthy local food is probably a natural kind of area that the county needs to think about as they're thinking about being more resilient in the face of a changing climate. It's the high cost of land here in Fairfax County makes it cost prohibitive for a lot of people to have their own agricultural operations that are it makes it difficult to support the economics. But there are some great examples here in our county of organizations that have figured it out, and so we want to continue to support those models for people that have figured out how to make a living doing agriculture. And so anyone who's on here, I would highly encourage you to support your local farmers, shop at farmers markets and buy from a community supported agriculture, CSA. These are all things that we can do. If we're not growing our own food, we can support others that are doing the hard work of growing food. So I love the idea of training more people, and I'm glad that you're doing that one, Pablo, there at Arcadia. So keep up the great work, everyone. And any other questions tonight? All right. Well, thank you again, Juan Pablo, so much for sharing your time and sharing your stories with us. I think I saw lots of people chatting about how appreciative they were. So it's been a really good event. And
yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you on the 17th then. And I guess some of you will be back on the 16th. Adrian and I will be presenting on how to start a veggie garden. And so we'll get into a little bit more into the weeds and talk about pest control and the basics of caring for plants. So
That's right.
Tonight.
Y'all have a good night, and thank you so much. Enjoy the warm weather tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be beautiful.
Hopefully it'll dry some things out for us. Yeah, dry some things out for us there. So